Great. I think we've given proper time for everybody to join in. Good morning, or wherever you're joining, good afternoon. My name is Peter Salidas. I'm the brand manager at Catchpoint. I'd like to welcome you all to today's session, the State of SRE. In just a moment, I'll be introducing our panelists, but first there's a few housekeeping items that I'd like to note. A recording of today's webcast will be emailed to you in the next 2 to 3 business days. And questions can be submitted using your Zoom control panel. So, we really want to foster some activity in today's panel. So just below or wherever your toolbar is, just if you have a question or want to engage with the panelists or other community members, you can do so there. While we won't get to all the questions today, we do plan on keeping this conversation going on social media, in future blog posts or even future panels. So we'd love to include your questions there. We'll also be live tweeting this webinar. So if you'd like to do so as well and join in on the fun, the hashtag is #SRE19. So if you want to talk about something that the panelists are saying, please use that hashtag there. Great, so we're going to be splitting this 1-hour webcast into 4 sections. Each of those sections is focused on a key finding from Catchpoint's 2nd annual SRE report. So that's how we're going to structure it today. So we're going to give you a statistic from the report, and then we're going to chat about it and dive in with the expert panelists that we have gathered here today. So great, I'm going to introduce the panelists. I'm going to stop the share on the slide deck we have here. First, we have Todd Polino. Todd, do you want to give the audience a little introduction?
Sure. So my name's Todd, as Peter said. I am a senior staff SRE at LinkedIn for about 5.5 years now. The first part of that, I was working on Apache Kafka, and now I'm doing a task called capacity engineering, doing capacity measurement and planning for the entire site.
Excellent. And one thing we like to do is include a fun fact about each of the panelists. Todd, you are a registered locksmith. Can you tell us how in the world that came about?
Yeah, so a couple of my colleagues at LinkedIn are into picking locks for fun and introduced it to me recently. And my 13-year-old daughter, for better or worse, picked up on that as well. I happen to live in a state where carrying lockpicks can be a problem, so I decided to just become a locksmith to not have to deal with it anymore.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd. So happy to have you here. Jennifer, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. So hi, I'm Jennifer Petoff, and I'm a senior program manager on the site reliability engineering team at Google, and I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. I'm actually the global lead for the SRE education program at Google, and I'm one of the co-editors of the original SRE book that we published back in 2016.
Awesome. And just a quick disclaimer on Jennifer, she is logged in via mobile. So she will unfortunately not be able to answer any questions, so she is not ignoring you if you are directly sending her a message. But we'll be sharing any questions that you do have with her following the webinar. A fun fact about Jennifer, because she has so much free time, she's also a travel blogger. It's Sidewalk Safari. You say it's a part-time travel blog, but it's fairly extensive.
Yeah, that it is. I love to travel, and yeah, writing about our travels is actually a nice way to kind of keep the memories alive. And I have another fun fact about this fun fact. I've actually written about the intersection of SRE and travel, and kind of SRE as it applies to real life travel emergencies. So good times there.
Awesome. We'll share the links to your blog and that as well following this. Brandon, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, hello, my name is Brandon Lawrence, and I work for an online retailer. Pretty much our focus day in and day out is just improving the consumer experience and making sure that our consumers don't have any difficulty at all.
Awesome. Your fact is great. It's in elementary school and middle school, you're a trained peer mediator tasked with resolving issues amongst the student body. So you've got a jump start on this.
Correct. It actually happened, I guess, by fate. I don't know. Life is funny.
So happy to have you, Brandon. Thank you for joining. Next, Jamie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jamie Wu. I'm formerly at Shopify and DigitalOcean. I'm a writer and researcher, and I worked really closely with the production engineering team at Shopify. I did some work around looking at the impact of incidents on SREs and presented it at a conference called SRECon, where the CFPs are actually open for Europe if anyone's interested in submitting for that. And actually it inspired the 2nd edition of the survey around looking at the impact of incidents on SREs had roots in the talk that I did.
Absolutely, and your fun fact is pretty astounding. You were a molecular biologist who grew modified E. coli to replace cartilage in the knee.
Yeah, when you've got E. coli, you've got friends for life. So I did that for 3 years, and we were, it was wild. I had coworkers who were trying to build patches for hearts made of stem cells, and I was working on artificial knee pads. It was really interesting, but grueling work. Pretty cool to have done that.
Amazing. And then last, Nemo, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nima Haj Yusuf, Software Engineering Manager for Site Reliability Team in E-Commerce Department at Alaska Airlines. I started with Alaska 5 years ago as a senior software developer and, progressed towards leadership, still hardcore developer too.
Love it. Your fun fact is something that I wish happened to me. You've had developed a body clock where now you're naturally waking up 10 to 15 minutes before your alarm, and you saying that's a problem?
It is interesting, the fact that my body has with the alarm clock, which I hated it because it means 15 minutes less sleep for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. So I think, enough with introductions. I think it's time to get into the presentation. So I'm going to quickly share my screen with the first fact from the report. Hopefully you guys can all see this. So the first key statistic was from the report that we found, 64% of respondents indicated that the SRE role or team has been in existence for 3 years or less. So that means despite officially starting back in 2003 with Ben Traynor and team at Google, SRE is a relatively new practice at most organizations. As a new practice, we thought it would be, a good first exercise to define what SRE is and what it means to the different organizations here today. Jennifer, how does your organization at Google define SRE, and how is it different from traditional development practices like DevOps?
Sure, happy to take a stab at that one. So first off, I wanted to call out, so SRE and DevOps really work to solve a similar set of problems, but in slightly different ways. So it's all about how to run systems more reliably while enabling feature velocity, so not slowing things down at the same time. Like, you can have it all. And SRE is actually, it's a framework for running large-scale systems reliably. It's really about this focus on running systems in production. And I did want to point out, so it's very interesting. So SRE at Google actually arose out of necessity. So in a traditional model of systems administration to support and maintain services and operate those systems, the number of operators will tend to grow more or less linearly with the size of your system. And Google was growing so fast, it just would have been impossible to hire the number of people required to do things the traditional way. And Ben Traynor-Sloss, our VP and founder of SRE, he describes it as it's what happens when you ask a software engineer to design an operations function. So it's all about applying software engineering skills and techniques to these operations problems. And we see SRE as boiling down to 4 main principles. So SRE really needs service level objectives. So how reliable does your system need to be to satisfy your users? And those SLOs need consequences if you fall short. SREs site reliability engineers really need to have time to make tomorrow better than today. So they need to be able to drive improvements to reduce toil, to automate things and make their jobs a little easier. SRE teams need to have the ability to regulate their workload. So it's not a matter of like product development throws it over the fence and SRE just supports it. Like, there needs to be certain standards in place. And finally, it is all about the blameless culture. So SREs see failure as an opportunity to improve, not as an opportunity to brandish pitchforks, as they say.
Anybody else have a similar or different definition from Jennifer's? It was very comprehensive. I don't know if there's anything to add on that.
I just want to add a little bit that Jennifer touched as well. It's interesting, right? It's always balancing feature development with risk assessment. And while you want to move as fast as possible while having as little risk as possible. And that's why this is such an interesting topic, because if you think about it, there's no one answer to it, and every organization is approaching differently.
Yeah, I've said that several times, that if you ask 5 SREs what SRE is, you'll get at least 6 different answers. Everyone has a different answer to what it is. I see it more as a cultural aspect where you're putting SRE, you're putting operations on the same level as development and product and the other parts of the organization, where SRE gets an equal seat at the table. Whereas with traditional operations teams that we've had in the past, operations is a money sink, so they don't get any say in what's going on. They just spend the money, they don't make the money. But once you start recognizing operations is critical to actually making the money, then you realize that, as Jennifer said, you can't scale it without taking on the practices of SRE.
Fantastic. Awesome. And so, we talked about how SRE is a relatively new practice in a lot of organizations, but we're actually going to start with talking about some of the bigger SRE organizations and understanding how those have developed. So we're going to start with Todd and Jennifer. And Google and LinkedIn have relatively mature SRE organizations. How have they evolved over the past 10 years or so, and what are the key lessons that you can share with disciplines that are emerging?
So SRE at LinkedIn is about 10 years old as it is. We really got our start back in 2009 when David Hankey, our VP at the time, joined LinkedIn. And as with Google, it grew out of necessity. We had disasters in our operations environment. We had a monolithic code base. Deployments were get everyone in the room at 5 p.m., stock up on pizza and caffeine, and maybe early in the morning you will finish your deployment, but it will often finish unsuccessfully because everything has to go out at once and nobody really knows if it's going to work before you try to roll it out. So LinkedIn's SRE started with helping to knock that down. And thankfully it was a partnership with the development organization at the time to get rid of the monolithic code base in what we called Project Inversion, because everything at LinkedIn has to have in the title of it somewhere. But that was all about breaking up that monolith and making it easier to deploy. Once development saw an exponential increase in their ability to roll out new code, we started iterating on SRE from that point. So SRE starts out as firefighters and saying no a lot, but then you move on to partnering with your development organization and putting in place the processes that they need to move quickly, but do so in a safe manner.
Great. Shall I take it from here, Peter, for the great stuff? Just don't want to step on any toes there. Yep. So thanks, Todd, for that description of what's going on at LinkedIn. At Google, I wasn't actually a member of Google's SRE team, back in the day in 2003 when we got started. But as I understand it from talking to Ben Traynor-Sloss and other longtime Google SREs, our SRE team actually started out as a monolith supporting all of our services in production. So over time, the teams have they've sharded, they've become more specialized. And this is not really that surprising because, knowledge about distributed systems, especially ones that are quite large, are not surprisingly distributed. So, and with the scale that Google operates, it's really not possible. It's impossible for any one engineer to have all the state about production and that detailed knowledge that's required to support a particular service. So forming specialized teams responsible for selected mission critical services is how we actually deal with that. And I also wanted to point out that at Google, SRE is actually a scarce resource by design. So over the years, teams have actually developed different engagement models with varying levels of involvement. And like the teams actually do some consulting support for product development teams who may not have a dedicated SRE team. And I also wanted to highlight that we recently, we've invested significant effort to build common production platforms. So this actually makes it easier for teams to maintain states, troubleshoot when things go wrong, and even change teams to support different services and like minimize that ramp up time during that transition. Excellent.
And then, kind of changing gears a little bit, with Brandon and Nemo, you support technologies in much different industry than Google and LinkedIn in the e-commerce space. How was your SRE practice developed at your respective organizations, and what is your focus? And I'll start with Brandon here, and then we'll pass it off to Nemo.
Well, for us, we more so are in a space where we're still connecting with a lot of development teams, and our basically core principle is just trying to prove our worth when we get our buy-in from those teams. Primarily, we focus on building those strong partnerships. We also focus on measurable improvements, such as time to detect, time to resolve. And we also like to focus on increasing automation where it sees fit, as well as increasing observability. So between all those major pillars, we just try to add that value to those teams and prove it throughout.
Awesome, Nima.
Yes, so our SRE team is fairly kind of new. It started 3 years ago. We are a small team of 4 engineers, and we are growing. I'm hiring. This team initially started, so just to give you a little bit of context, 5 years ago, we went a huge agile transformation. We formed a product-led organization where each product team owns their product, but there was a lot of firefighting going on, and feature development team were dealing a lot of incidents from production. So this team was started as an experimental team to increase overall reliability of our products and minimize firefighting. It since then evolved to become a core group within e-commerce department. We took some of the best practices from Google's definition of SRE, but at the end of the day, we realized we are not running a data center like Google, so we customized a lot of those practices to fit Alaskan needs. The areas of focus are 3 major areas of focus: proactive monitoring for all our critical applications and services, to continuously minimize mean time to detection and mean time to resolution of major incidents, especially severity 1 and severity 2. We do this through automation first approach and engineering work. We heavily focus on preventive work. We are a small team. We cannot scale our service out without automation. So we heavily dependent on automation. Secondly, we drive efficiencies in systems and processes. We help with capacity planning, performance tuning, and facilitating things like root cause analysis. My team does it. And thirdly, we evangelize site reliability best practices. We do this through partner up with product group so that they can implement reliable software from start.
That's really interesting, and Jamie, I think it's an interesting perspective that you have. You know, you've seen both, mature and developing SRE organizations. In your experience, what seems to be the most common differences between the two?
Yeah, I think actually what Nima was saying really kind of aligns with that, in that when we look at maturity, it's not necessarily how long an organization has been doing SRE or how much they've scaled. It's really how well they're able to implement these principles to fit the type of business that they have, right? Everyone's not solving Google-sized problems and having the same parameters. And so it's really being able to separate out that signal from the noise, being able to choose the right SLIs, and then being able to understand the right SLOs for that, and then being able to look at, for example, in the Google book, they have their Maslow's hierarchy of SRE. Which of those are actually reasonable for them? What does SRE mean for them? And can they take the results from that? Can you, let's say, look at your postmortems and put in the results from that to make it worthwhile for you? I think that's what maturity means, versus just saying we've done SRE for a decade. That doesn't mean anything if it hasn't evolved. Then I don't think that that's necessarily maturity. I think you're on mute, Peter.
Giving me my cue here. Thank you. Anybody have anything to add to that before we switch gears to incidents?
I would just say plus one to all the things that folks have talked about, like the importance of monitoring, the importance of automation, and the customizing the different elements to fit your particular situation. Because it's not just about changing the name on the door; it's about undergoing this cultural transformation, and again continuing to iterate in a sense that works for your organization.
Excellent. And great segues here. And we talk about firefighting and incidents and MTTD. And so, another big takeaway from the report was incident resolution is, it's still a massive part of the SRE job across, most organizations that we did survey. The one key statistic, it was 49%. So just about 1 in 2 respondents, had worked on a service incident within the past week. As a non-SRE, that blows my mind. But so actually, I'm gonna share a quick poll actually just to see launching it now. So if everybody on the line, I think this is going to be on for about a minute, can just let us know about their own service incident experience. When was the last time that you worked on a service incident? So it's a huge topic, and so I'm going to throw this over to Nemo. Now, how much of your SRE organization's time is dedicated to incident resolution versus other initiatives? I know you explained the 3 pillars. How much time is incidents versus everything else that you referred to?
Yeah, so there's no doubt that incident resolution is a huge part of SRE job, right? However, at Alaska, since we are a small team, we dedicate majority of our time preventive work, and we have implemented good automation application performance monitoring tools in all our production environments, both on-prem and in cloud. This gives us to have deep visibility into the system, and we created on the top of that actionable alerts. For example, in the last year, we reduced the alert noise up to 92%, which brought down from mean time to detection in hours into less than 10 minutes now, which is a huge deal for us, for our team. And oftentimes we are resolving issues before our customers get impacted. But having said that, we are still on the hook of resolving issues when they happen and facilitating the root cause analysis. So I would say majority of the time, preventive work, our backlog is full of how to be ahead of the curve and prevent the next severity 1, severity 2. But when they happen, we're still on the hook of resolving those.
Great, and we got some early poll results actually. So there are 6 folks on the line who are working on an incident right now. Maybe you could log off. We'll be here for the hour. Maybe it's just taking care of that. But yeah, it seems pretty much in line. And we'll send these results out with the survey. Incidents are quite frequent. Moving on to Jennifer. Why are service level objectives needed, and how does this tie in with incident response?
Okay, so it's interesting. We've sort of had this like firefighting theme, kind of going throughout, and like moving away from being firefighters to being much more proactive and working on prevention rather than reacting to things that are going wrong. And Tanya Riley, she's fantastic. Where is Tanya? Formerly of Google, now at Squarespace. So she's actually done a talk likening, sort of going through the New York City fire code and drawing analogies to SRE. So you're essentially trying to move from being a firefighter to, like developing fire codes that prevent bad things from happening in the first place. So there's some, and in some ways, I look at SLOs as being more related to the fire code rather than the firefighting. But anyway, that was a bit of an aside. The TLDR is that your service level objectives, or SLOs, actually determine when you should declare an incident. I also wanted to start by saying that 100% is never, 100% uptime, 100% reliability is never the right SLO. So if you set a target of perfection, you're really setting yourself up to fail. And also it's a recipe to burn out the people in your organization, because if you're striving for perfection, every little thing that goes wrong is now an emergency, even if your customers and your users might never even notice. And that brings up another point. So SLOs really should be set along the dimensions that your users actually care about and should correlate with user happiness. So if the SLO is met, your users are happy. If you miss the SLO, this would correlate with user sadness. And this hones the appropriate level of response when something goes wrong. So is the SLO at risk? Are we reacting to the right things and with an appropriate level of urgency to the situation? And again, it's deciding these things in advance that can really be useful.
Todd, same question for you about service level objectives. Which ones are needed?
So I'm gonna repeat something Jennifer said, which is that you have to have the right level of urgency, the right level of SLO. For example, and I'll probably get this statistic wrong, but I'm close enough. The uptime for a pacemaker, the availability for a pacemaker is something like 98%. And we're all talking about 5 nines of availability on online social media networks. Now, the other side of that is that the velocity of failures is important when it comes to an SLO. So if you have all of your pacemaker failures in 5 minutes instead of 5 years over the life of the device, a serious problem going on, and that pacemaker is going to fail and the person's going to have some serious issues. Whereas over the life of the device, 98% is fine. It can not work every once in a while. So we have to look at our availability and our latency numbers the same way. How fast do you really need your cat videos to load is the question it comes down to for a lot of us. And as she said, SLOs define when you have an incident. I had to go through this a couple of years ago with the Kafka deployments at LinkedIn, where we didn't have a good definition for when we were supposed to declare an incident. So what would happen is that the SRE team would say, hey, we've got a major incident with Kafka, and the network operations center would say, no, you don't, it doesn't fit our guidelines. So we had to develop the set of guidelines for the NOC to look at, which is ultimately the SLOs that we were providing. So how quick should data replication be? How slow can messages be produced or consumed to the system? If you don't declare your SLOs, you still have SLOs. It's just that you didn't get to define them. Your customers are defining them for you. And that's the best type of incident, because that's the incident you didn't know you had because you weren't monitoring what you were supposed to be. And your customers come to you and tell you that your system is broken, which as an SRE is never something you want to hear. Even worse, if it's a front-end service and your customers are telling you this on Twitter, and they're mocking you and your PR department is picking up on it.
Nemo or Brandon or Jamie, and does that ring true with your organizations as well?
Yes, and we are actually undergoing establishing SLOs right now. That's an area we haven't focused in the past few years, and we are actively doing that. It's a daunting task, but what we did is we are looking into this thing called achievable SLOs. So basically, since we have a lot of data about our performance data through APMs, we look in the trend of that data, and Jennifer talked about the happiness of customers. It's sometimes hard to identify what that means. So we consider our customers are happy if they're not complaining, right? So based on the data we have, we are coming with SLIs and creating the achievable SLOs to be the target for us.
Excellent. And moving on to to the actual resolution here, I am kicking this off with Brandon. And what is the standard approach to identifying and resolving these incidents? I know before the Twitter storm and the pitchforks and the unhappy customers, and the follow-up to that is, how many teams are involved?
For us, funny enough, we also don't just stop at incidents. We also include problem management and problem resolution. So looking at the ideal approach, we don't really have an ideal approach. Incidents and problems can come from various, whether it's monitoring that triggers or user reports, but 9 times out of 10, if we have proper monitoring in place, we'll get it ideally in sense through those alerts that we have set up. We also have some alerts that are a little proactive so that we can even detect before it can become an S1 or an S2, and we can catch it at a lower state before it builds up and then can turn into that pitchforks, as you would say, type of scenario. So that being said, we also detail run books for problem escalation as well as incident escalation, so that we can also provide and approach that situation with the proper level of urgency. I heard stated earlier that that is a key point to focus on. You don't want to treat every situation as if it's an S1, as well as we make sure that we engage the teams that may be tied to root cause. So depending on where the actual issue is coming from, we'll engage whatever teams are necessary, whatever engineering teams are necessary.
Excellent. Any other additions from the panelists? Just about the number of teams and who does get involved when an incident happens. And before I do throw that out there, we do have another poll, which is interesting. Is during incident response, what teams are typically involved in your organization? So, I'm going to launch this poll and leave this open to the panelists to jump in.
Yeah, within LinkedIn, we actually have a fairly open incident process, which I would guess that a lot of organizations do, where the incidents are announced in a way that the entire SRE org is aware of them at any given point in time. The degree to which they want to be aware is up to them. But they're all carried out on, for us, Slack in a common channel that everyone knows what it is. So you'll get every team that's interested in an incident jumping in. You get some interesting dynamics here. It can cause problems, especially in a major incident where it involves a lot of teams, if you don't isolate communications, because the team that's actually working on the incident just can't get to what they need to see over the noise of everyone talking. At the same time, you can get a perspective that you weren't expecting to see within an incident, and sometimes you come up with a response from an unexpected team that may not be directly involved, and they suggest a response, or even better, if they can go in and take a look at the logs that are involved and tease out what the problem is for you, even though it's not their system and it's not their primary responsibility. This ultimately plays into one of LinkedIn's values, which is members first, and we're always looking at the members first, and that means it's not my job isn't an answer that you'll ever hear from anyone.
Interesting, and the poll is pretty interesting here. It's literally, and I'll show it now for everyone. I'm sharing the results. It's every team. Every team has a hand in incident resolution, which is pretty illuminating. Anything to add, panelists, before we move on to the next question?
I think the number of teams involved in an incident often depends on the severity of that incident. The primary on call for the service that was paged would decide who else to loop in, whether it's members of their team to help them troubleshoot, waking up a dev if necessary, or bringing in other teams as appropriate. And then the incident management structure can become more elaborate and more formalized the larger the incident gets. Sorry, my phone fell asleep, so that's why I'm just waking it up. There you go.
Sure, and then moving on to the follow-up of incidents. Jamie, would love to get your perspective, because I'm sure you've seen across a lot of organizations their own post-mortem process. Our post-mortem standard practice, I know we talked about different types of severities of issues. And then what makes a post-mortem particularly effective?
Yeah, I think everyone knows postmortems as a standard practice. I think the big thing that's different is how effective is that postmortem? Because I think that during the incident, that's when all the energy is. There's this kind of like critical nature to it, and everyone kind of jumps to react to it. And by the time you're at the postmortem, you might be off to another incident, or there's other things that people need to do in their day-to-day. So at SRE Con Americas, we did a straw poll of the audience there. Based on the survey, the second edition of the survey, people had written in answers. And one of the things someone had written was, "It sucks when nobody else cares about the postmortem." And we asked the audience, how many of you agree with this statement? and literally all hands went up in the room. It was pretty shocking to see. And so I think what it speaks to is we understand why postmortems are needed, but what happens to that material after it's done? You know, do people actually see that being implemented and put back into the system so that people feel like there's change? And how does it end up actually feeling worse to put all this effort into a postmortem and then see it go nowhere, right? How deflating is that? And I think that that's something that we're really interested in looking in, is how different companies are approaching that. How do you make sure, this is a people side thing, really, to make sure that postmortems work? How do different companies approach it so that they actually learn every lesson that they can from an incident rather than just rushing to the next one?
You know, Jennifer, you were talking about failure as an opportunity there. It probably, you know, what Jamie said probably rings true for you.
It does indeed. So, you know, postmortems, when an outage happens, and it inevitably will, like Murphy's Law says it will, the fact that, you know, 100% uptime is not a reasonable target, like you've already paid a price when there's an outage. So writing that postmortem is like the gift you give yourself and your organization to reap a future reward and a little bit of payback for the problems that have been had. So including prioritized action items aimed at eliminating classes of errors, you know, it makes the system, like, it ultimately will make the system more robust. So I can understand Jamie's frustration, but like if people can recognize, like, this is something that will help me, it will help our organization, it'll help our users, you know, hopefully you can get folks to rally behind it. And then just putting those prioritized action items in bugs or, you know, tickets of appropriate severity, you know, like helps to ensure a little bit that you know, things are followed through.
Yeah, I know, Brandon, you mentioned you know, the playbooks and the run books. You know, does anybody have any commentary on, you know, that feedback loop is bringing, you know, what you've documented on a postmortem back into the, you know, preventative or response practices that you do?
For us, go ahead.
Yep, go ahead, Brandon.
I referenced Brandon, so we'll take it over to you.
All right. For us, in every AAR action after action review, we tend to have next actions, and in those next actions, those can be detailed in a run book so that we don't have to encounter this again. And that, I guess, is the best teacher in these situations, is just making it so that you don't have to encounter that. And if it is encountered, we learn from it.
Yeah, and on our side, you know, the postmortems are all handled the same way, which is the teams involved take care of them and then follow up on the action items themselves. Some of those action items will have more visibility than others, but the most visible incidents or the most visible postmortems are usually followed up on every week in a higher level postmortem review, where we'll pick out 3 or 4 key incidents that had postmortems and review both the postmortem and the next actions from those. And that's done with up through the SVP level, so that they have very high visibility within the organization. And that's how we assure that we're following up on everything consistently all the time.
Excellent. For the sake of time, we're going to move on to another interesting topic from the book is stress level. And, you know, obviously it's an important thing to note, you know, when you're dealing with, you know, something like an incident a week, or as 6 folks on the line are dealing with right now. And so one of the big takeaways, and it seems obvious, but resolving incidents is stressful. We had 79, almost 80% of respondents reported that they experienced stress after an incident. And Todd, you know, I'm going to kick this off with you. Have you or any of your colleagues experienced an incident that was especially stressful? You know, what were those contributing factors to that?
Oh my, I remember a little over a year ago, before I shifted off of the Kafka team, we had some significant problems due to growth of the system that was unchecked and alert noise. So the major contributing factor was we had 90% of our alerts were not actionable. And we were trying to knock that down. And in addition, we had grown 100% of usage in Kafka in the space of 3 months' time, where it previously took us 7 years to get to the point where we then grew 100% in 3 months. So we had some significant problems, and I keenly remember the stress on this because I spent half an hour on the phone with my boss, pacing up and down the street, having a very heated conversation over the state of problems, because I was getting a paging alert every 3.5 minutes during a 12-hour all-con shift for an entire week. So that alert noise will stick with me forever. And one of the things I harp on now is how we need to get rid of alerts and shift to just SLO-based alerts and automation for everything else.
Nemo, I know you were talking about alert noise earlier. Do you have anything to add to that? I know the question that we had for you was, are there any keys to reducing stress? But did you have anything that was in reference to those alert fatigue?
Definitely, it seems like similar situation we have been in last year and a half ago, where our alerts were not actionable, and we really invested in making it actionable, implementing application performance monitoring tool that can give us the automation that we needed, and reviewing all our alert metrics and make sure that they are the right threshold. So that effort produced 92% reduction of alert noise, which eliminated the alert fatigue that you get when you have all these alerts. So definitely I can be related to that. But in terms of keys to reducing stress during the incident, it's very important to understand where the stress is coming from, right? A very good book is called Human Side of Postmodern by David, I forget the last name, but it's a good read actually. It goes over the triggers of the stress. It's unusual event, right? This incident is, there is high stake involved. There is unpredictability nature of the event. Some people feel like you losing control, especially if you don't have good deep visibility into your system and you don't know what's going on. It feels like the sky's falling. And to add to that, you also thinking at the same time the negative impact it might cause to you, like what's going to happen later on and how people will perceive you. So all of those emotions mixed together create the stress situation. And keys to reducing, there is environmental key, right? You have to have a supportive environment, organization that is much more accepting failure and, seeing failure as a part of a deal. As long as we innovating and creating complex systems, failure will be part of that deal, right? So a blameless culture is a key when that held these people accountable to learn from the incident, but definitely not responsible the failure itself. The other thing is, if you look at the incident life cycle, I was reading these statistics that says 73% of incident life cycle people spend in the response phase, just trying to figure out what the heck went wrong. That's a huge percentage, right? So being prepared for incident is nearly as important as the incident itself, and it can reduce the stress level during the incident. Having clear incident response plan, definitely the key. And once you have that response plan, practice, then practice, then practice a little more, right? So to build that muscle memory needed to create calmness when the actual event happens. So all of that, in supportive environment, being prepared, but I will add on the top of that, investing in preventive work. What happens happiness before the incident is important, reducing after the incident stress, right? Having good visibility into your system and having context about what went wrong gives your engineers that ability of like feeling they have a control over the situation, and all of those reduces the incident stress.
Excellent. Yeah, it's an interesting point. You're talking about practice, and I have a question about that. And then you also, introduced the concept of a blameless culture, which we'll also address in a minute. But I did want to, stay on this practice and this preventative work that you were talking about. I know, Google has the DIRT exercises. There's, the Chaos Day, principle, and the chaos engineering. Any panelists have, at your respective organizations, do you do something like, maybe if Jennifer wants to talk about DIRT, or any other panelists do similar exercises? I'd love to get your perspective on that.
So in terms of better preparing for incidents and outages, so one thing in training, for example, is near and dear to my heart as the lead for the SRE education program here at Google. And upfront training can be really useful for building confidence, in a person's knowledge to tackle things when they go wrong. Wheels of misfortune, as we call them. So it's more like a thought exercise of, hey, here's the scenario. There's sort of the person that leads a volunteer through an exercise, and it's a good way to kind of like talk through what you do in a real incident. And then, so they can troubleshoot and build confidence in resolving issues. And then for DIRT, disaster recovery testing, we break real things in a controlled fashion to really uncover hidden fragility, system dependencies. Like, this is super, super important. And again, DIRT really focuses on the same goals as chaos engineering in the industry. And DIRT testing can be used to help teams prioritize fixes or system improvements before you have an uncontrolled outage on your hands. So controlled outages are less stressful than an uncontrolled outage, I would say.
Yeah, any piggybacks off that? I know, Brandon, we talk about better preparing, and in some of our conversations before the panel, you mentioned about you had quite a successful holiday shopping season, especially for e-commerce companies during that, surge period. Did you run exercises? How did you better prepare for that, that period of added traffic, Brandon?
I think the biggest benefit that we have is with our embedded SREs. They know these services like the back of their hand, and a lot of times we have situations where they'll see even just the start of certain errors, or they'll see spikes in error rate, and they just know exactly where to pinpoint it into and where to dial in, and that comes with having detailed monitoring as well as distributive tracing in place and log aggregation. And then to circle back around, looking at the analytics portion of it and making those relationships between what we're finding in production. Another piece is also going through regular periods of monitoring audits where we go through and look at the alerts that we have in place, fine tune them on a regular cadence, because production traffic grows and also drops on a regular basis. So we can't just set it and forget it. So it's just a lot of good, solid work that goes in from the team beforehand that allows for the success on the back end.
Fantastic. And I know we're coming up at the top of the hour. Unfortunately, there's a lot more to get to, but I did want to circle back to something that Nima was talking about, and whether Jennifer or Jamie, if you have a perspective on it, any other of the panelists, I'd love to dive further into establishing that blameless culture. I know, and we've gotten some feedback and questions, from the audience already. So, what role does having a blameless culture play in reducing that stress across the board? Anybody can jump in on this.
And I'm happy to say a few words about this. So I think blameless culture is an incredibly important part of site reliability engineering, and for organizations having success in adopting the model. So if someone's really worried about losing their job, if their job might be at risk if they make a mistake. It's undoubtedly it's a stressful experience. So blameless culture with a mantra like human errors are really system problems, that removes this level of worry, it reduces stress, and it also, by the way, it makes it much more likely that you'll actually get to the heart of the problem and figure out what actually caused the outage. If people are not afraid to share what they know, to share any mistakes they might have made, the full picture is much easier to determine. So again, failure, like seeing failure as an opportunity to improve and not this opportunity to brandish pitchforks, is a key element. And one way that you can really drive this home in your organization, like having your leadership really walk the talk. And again, like we've had cases, and this is called out in the SRE book, where someone actually did it, like they caused an outage, but they sort of sounded the alarm bells and rolled back their change, which led the outage to be much shorter than it would have been otherwise. And they were basically like, they got peer bonuses, they were like lauded on the stage at TGIF. So actually like celebrating the cases where someone's come forward and said, hey, I made a mistake, it caused this problem, and you know, by bringing it forward, it made the outage much shorter.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, like there is obviously the blameless culture comes from medicine, right? This idea of blameless or just culture, and they're really looking at accidents to see whether or not that is an accident that can happen to anyone, or is it something specific that a person had done, or was there a malicious intent to it? And I think that being able to classify those different things are really important, because if you can see it as a systemic error, then that's really about anyone could have made that mistake because the system wasn't in place for it. And to underline something that Todd had said right from the get-go, SRE is cultural. It means you really have to focus on the people. You have to really think about how the people function in this, not just create processes and expect everyone to be interchangeable within them. So briefly going back to this idea of incidents, you know, what's your on-call rotation like? How do you compensate people when they've been on call for a long time? How, you know, what is the time frame when you switch out an IMOC or people who are working incidents so they can be as fresh as possible? I think a lot of times it's very easy for developers to be very comfortable in the processes and stick with that, versus really thinking about the actual humans who are running all this and how this affects them. So blameless culture can't work if it's just this kind of like almost this tome, these set of principles that are rarefied but then not actually human scale. I think the most important thing is to think about the actual people involved and how do you make it so that you're all trying to solve a problem and learn from the lesson, and not necessarily just point fingers and say, well, you did something wrong.
So
yeah,
go ahead, Todd.
Go ahead. I was going to say, even taking it back a step further, not just in incidents, but within the organization as a whole, SREs are partners. We're partnering with developers, we're partnering with product teams to get everything rolled out as quickly as possible and safely. When I can look at the rest of my organization and disagree with someone when they're talking and know that they're working towards the same end I am, we're all working towards the member experience and what the members get. So I know, even if I disagree with them, that we're trying to do the same thing. So then that puts me in a frame of mind where I can say, okay, how can I meet them in the middle? How can I understand their point of view? So blameless culture even steps into that by allowing me to not treat them like they're trying to cause a problem, and instead step into their shoes and understand their position a little better.
Yeah, I was going to add to that as well. Blameless culture is the most important thing to have for successful SRE. If you think about it, you can always fix the systems and process to better support with people's good intentions. Most of engineers are doing the right thing under the given circumstance. So at the time, that's what they thought was the right thing to do. So instead, focus on the fixing systems and process so that they can better support people's good intentions. And if you do that, your engineers will be much more willing to forthcome with information and share how the failure happened. And that's the key to is understanding the root cause, not finger pointing.
Excellent. And I know we're actually even a little past what we were trying to aim for. But it's such a good conversation. If anybody has any final thoughts or opinions here, I'll open up for a second, or else I'll just go to wrapping it up. Okay, I will wrap it up. Well, that is a wrap for today. I just want to thank everybody who joined on the line. There were some really amazing questions. I was able to breeze through some of them. I know Todd and Nemo and some of the other panelists were able to answer a couple of these. I know, Jennifer, on your mobile phone, it was a bit difficult. I'm sorry, but what we'll be doing is I'll share with the rest of the panelists, and no promises on any answers, but hopefully we can try to get to some of those either via a blog post or some other feature. So thank you everybody who was able to join, but a huge thank you to each of these panelists who have really taken their time from very busy schedules. Jamie, Nemo, Todd, Brandon, Jennifer. It was such a fantastic contribution that you have for the SRE community to show up today and share your perspectives. Thank you so much. And then just a reminder, because it's always a popular question for anybody who missed this session, the session was recorded and it's going to be sent out in the next 2 to 3 business days. We'll be working hard to make that happen for you. So we'll send out an email to everybody who registered, but also it's going to be posted on the Catchpoint website. We have an on-demand webinar section, and we're also going to post it on social. So just thank you again. Big thanks to the panelists, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing it, Peter.
Of course.
Thanks, Peter.
Take care. Cheers.
Ciao.
Bye.
Have a good one.